A Life of Cleopatra VII, Last Pharaoh of Egypt. Prologue. The Whisper of the Nile. The river Nile, lifeblood of an ancient kingdom, flowed thick and slow beneath the Memphis sun. Its waters carried not just the fertile silt that birthed empires, but the echoes of millennia, the shouts of pharaohs, the chants of priests, the sighs of countless souls bound to its rhythm. On its banks, under a sky bleached white with heat, a dynasty clung to power, its roots deep in the Macedonian conquests of Alexander the Great, yet its heart increasingly entwined with the ancient pulse of Egypt itself. The Ptolemaic line, once glittering conquerors, now ruled a realm fraying at the edges, beset by internal strife and the looming shadow of a new power rising in the west, Rome. It was into this crucible of fading glory and desperate ambition that Cleopatra VII, Thea Philocator, was born in the winter of 69 BC. Her story, woven from threads of audacity, intellect, passion, and ruthless political calculation, would become the last, magnificent, and ultimately tragic flowering of the pharaonic age. She would not merely inherit a throne, she would seize destiny, challenge empires, and etch her name not just in the annals of Egypt, but forever upon the consciousness of the world.
Chapter 1. The Viper's Nest, Heiress of a Dying Dynasty. The air within the marble halls of Alexandria's royal palace was thick with more than just the Mediterranean humidity. It was saturated with intrigue, suspicion, and the metallic tang of impending violence. Cleopatra, barely more than a child, observed it all with eyes far older than her years. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, the flute player, was a weak king, dancing precariously on a tightrope strung between his rebellious people and the insatiable demands of Rome. His survival depended on colossal bribes paid to Roman senators, draining Egypt's treasuries and fueling popular resentment. Cleopatra learned her first brutal lessons in power here. She saw her father flee to Rome, begging for military aid to reclaim his throne, leaving her half-sister, Berenice IV, to rule. She witnessed Berenice's brief, doomed reign and the cold efficiency with which the Roman general Gabalius, funded by Auletes' gold, restored her father, executing Berenice without a flicker of hesitation. The message was clear. Roman favor was paramount, and survival required absolute ruthlessness. Auletes returned, a puppet king, propped up by Roman legions, his authority hollow. Cleopatra absorbed everything. She learned languages, Egyptian, the tongue of her subjects, a revolutionary act for a Ptolemy who traditionally shunned it, alongside Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Ethiopian, and more. She studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and statecraft in the Great Library, the intellectual heart of her city. She studied the complex theology of Isis, recognizing the power of divine association. She observed the labyrinthine politics of the court, the shifting alliances, the whispered plots. She understood that Egypt's survival depended not just on resisting Rome, but on mastering its politics, on becoming indispensable to its powerful men. When Auletes died in 51 BC, he left a will bequeathing the throne jointly to his 17-year-old daughter, Cleopatra, and his 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. The document also named the Roman Republic as the guardian of this arrangement, a desperate bid for legitimacy that also placed Egypt firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. Cleopatra, brilliant, ambitious, and steeped in the realities of her inheritance, had no intention of sharing power with a child controlled by regents, particularly the cunning eunuch Pothinus, the scheming general Achillas, and the rhetorician Theodotus. She acted swiftly, sidelining her brother, signing documents first, appearing alone on coinage. She was Pharaoh, Isis incarnate, daughter of Re. But the viper's nest struck back. By 48 BC, Pothinus and his faction had driven her from Alexandria, forcing her into exile in the deserts of Syria. Her brother, a pawn, reigned alone. Cleopatra, however, was not one to fade into the sands. She raised an army, gathering mercenaries, and leveraging her formidable intellect and charisma. She was down, but far from out. The stage was set for a gamble that would change the course of history.
Chapter 2. The Carpet Unfurls, a Meeting of Titans. Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome, arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival Pompey the Great in the autumn of 48 BC. He found a city simmering with tension. Ptolemy XIII's court, believing they could curry favor with the victor, presented Caesar with the ghoulish gift of Pompey's severed head. Caesar, a master politician despite his ruthlessness, recoiled. This act of barbarism against a former consul and son-in-law was not gratitude. It was a crude blunder revealing the court's dangerous instability. Caesar, with only a small contingent of legionaries, installed himself in the royal palace, demanding the warring siblings disband their armies and settle their dispute according to their father's will. Cleopatra saw her chance. To reach Caesar within the heavily guarded palace, surrounded by her brother's hostile forces, required audacity worthy of legend. The tale, immortalized by Plutarch, tells of a loyal servant, Apollodorus the Sicilian, smuggling her into the palace rolled within a large carpet or bedding sack. Unrolled at Caesar's feet, the young queen emerged, not as a supplicant, but as a vision of calculated allure and regal composure. 21 years old, possessing not classical beauty, but an irresistible magnetism, a voice like an instrument of many strings, keen intellect flashing in her eyes, she presented herself as the rightful heir, the embodiment of Egypt's ancient dignity, and crucially, as a valuable ally. Caesar, nearing 50, conqueror of Gaul, master of Rome, was captivated. This was no ordinary princess. Her wit matched his, her political acumen was evident, her courage undeniable. He agreed to uphold Olete's will, reinstating the joint rule. But Ptolemy XIII's faction, enraged by Cleopatra's bold maneuver and Caesar's interference, ignited the Alexandrian War. For months, Caesar, Cleopatra, and their combined forces were besieged within the palace quarter, fighting street by street, harbor by harbor. At one point, Caesar had to swim for his life under a hail of missiles. Cleopatra was no passive observer. She was a strategist and a symbol of resistance. The conflict climaxed with the Battle of the Nile. Reinforcements arrived by Caesar, and Ptolemy XIII, attempting to flee, drowned in the river he sought to control. Egypt and Cleopatra were Caesar's. But the queen's position rested entirely on the Romans' power. To solidify it, she employed the oldest tool of diplomacy. She became Caesar's lover. By 47 BC, she was pregnant. Chapter 3. Isis in Rome, Sojourn on the Tiber. Victorious but embroiled in the complex aftermath, Caesar lingered in Egypt for several months, cruising the Nile with Cleopatra, a potent symbol of his conquest and her restored authority. Their son, Ptolemy XV Philopator Philomentor Caesar, known inevitably as Caesarion, Little Caesar, was born in June 47 BC. He was Cleopatra's ultimate gambit, a living link between the Ptolemaic dynasty and the most powerful man in Rome, a potential heir to both worlds. In 46 BC, Caesar summoned Cleopatra, Caesarion, and her nominal co-ruler, another young brother, Ptolemy XIV, to Rome. Her arrival was a sensation. Installed in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, she lived not as a mistress hidden away, but as a visiting queen, conducting state business, meeting senators, dazzling intellectuals. She was the living embodiment of the exotic East, of Egypt's fabulous wealth and ancient mystique. Caesar openly honored her.
dedicating a golden statue of her as Isis in the temple of Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, the mythical ancestress of his own Julian clan. This blatant association shocked conservative Romans. Rumors flew. Caesar planned to marry her, move the capital to Alexandria, declare himself king with her as queen, make Caesarion his heir over his grandnephew Octavian. Cleopatra navigated the treacherous currents of Roman politics with her characteristic intelligence, using her wealth and influence to build alliances. She studied Rome as she had studied Egypt, understanding its factions and ambitions. Her presence became a lightning rod for Caesar's enemies, who painted him as a tyrant, corrupted by an oriental despot. The Republican ideals, however frayed, recoiled at this Egyptian queen wielding such influence. Her sojourn, while demonstrating her power on the world stage, also sowed seeds of deep resentment. When Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March 44 BC, stabbed by senators fearing his kingly aspirations, Cleopatra's world shattered. Her protector, the father of her child, the linchpin of her security, was gone. Overnight, her position in Rome became untenable, dangerous. With characteristic decisiveness, she gathered her household, including the young Ptolemy XIV, and fled back to Alexandria. Ptolemy XIV died soon after, conveniently for Cleopatra, leaving her sole ruler with Caesarion as her co-regent. She was Pharaoh. But Egypt was more vulnerable than ever. The Roman world was plunging into chaos, and she needed a new champion. Chapter 4. The Divine Banquet. Alliances forged in wine and war. The Roman Republic fractured after Caesar's death. The second triumvirate, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, and Lepidus, emerged victorious against Caesar's assassins at Philippi in 42 BC. Antony, granted command of the wealthy eastern provinces, summoned the rulers of the client kingdoms to Tarsus in Cilicia in 41 BC to assess their loyalty and resources for his planned campaign against Parthia. Cleopatra understood the stakes. Antony, known for his military prowess, his love of luxury, his impulsiveness, and his susceptibility to charm, was the key. She would not come as a supplicant. She arrived in Tarsus not on a warship, but on a breathtakingly lavish barge. Its stern glinted with gold, its sails dyed deep purple. Silver oars rode in time to the music of flutes and pipes. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, dressed as Venus, surrounded by attendants costumed as Cupids and Nereids. The scent of exotic perfumes drifted across the water. Antony, expecting a routine meeting, found himself witnessing a divine epiphany. The encounter was pure theater, meticulously staged by Cleopatra. She hosted Antony on her barge for a series of banquets of legendary extravagance, each night surpassing the last. Gold plates, jewels dissolved in vinegar, priceless tapestries. Tales of the excess spread like wildfire. But beneath the spectacle was a sharp political mind. Cleopatra addressed Antony's accusations of disloyalty during the civil wars with wit and persuasive arguments, shifting blame onto her enemies. She offered not just wealth, but the immense resources of Egypt, grain, ships, money, crucial for Antony's Parthian ambitions. Antony, a man of immense appetites and romantic inclinations, was utterly enchanted. The soldier met the goddess, and the goddess won. He followed her back to Alexandria, spending the winter of 41-40 BC in a whirlwind of feasting, revelry, and passion that scandalized Rome but cemented their alliance. She became his lover, his confidant, his indispensable partner. Together, they formed the Society of Inimitable Livers, dedicating themselves to pleasure, but also laying the groundwork for a shared vision of power in the East.
Chapter 5. Eastern Stars, Reforging an Empire. The idyll in Alexandria was interrupted by news from Rome and the wider world. Antony's wife, Fulvia, and his brother Lucius had clashed disastrously with Octavian in Italy. Simultaneously, a Parthian invasion swept through Syria and Asia Minor, threatening Roman territories. Antony was forced to return to Italy in 40 BC to settle affairs with Octavian, resulting in the Treaty of Brundisium and his marriage to Octavian's sister, Octavia, a political seal on the reconciliation. Cleopatra was left in Alexandria, pregnant with Antony's twins. For 4 years, Antony was largely absent, dealing with Rome, Parthia, where he suffered a significant defeat, and his new wife. Cleopatra focused on ruling Egypt, nurturing her children, Alexander Helios, sun, and Cleopatra Selene, moon, born in 40 BC, and later Ptolemy Philadelphus, between 40 and 39 BC, and consolidating her power. She watched and waited, maintaining correspondence with Antony. Her position remained precarious, dependent on his favor and the fragile peace between the triumvirs. In 37 BC, Antony, preparing a massive new campaign against Parthia, summoned Cleopatra to Antioch. The reunion rekindled their passionate alliance. Here, they formalized their partnership in a grand political and religious ceremony. Antony recognized the twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and granted them vast territories: Armenia, Media, Parthia, once conquered, Cyrenaica, and Libya for Alexander, Crete and Cyrenaica for Selene. To Cleopatra herself, he restored Cyprus and parts of Cilicia and Syria, territories once held by the Ptolemies. Most significantly, he formally recognized Caesarion as the legitimate son of Julius Caesar, a direct challenge to Octavian's status as Caesar's only heir. This Donations of Alexandria, in 34 BC, staged in the Gymnasium before a vast audience, was a masterstroke of propaganda. Antony and Cleopatra, seated on golden thrones, presented themselves not merely as rulers, but as divine avatars. Antony as Dionysus Osiris, the life-giving god of the East and the underworld, and Cleopatra as Isis Aphrodite, the universal mother goddess. Their children were proclaimed kings and queens of kings. This was more than territorial redistribution. It was the declaration of a rival power center, a Hellenistic Oriental empire centered in Alexandria, with its own divine mandate, challenging the supremacy of Rome and Octavian's vision of a Roman West. Cleopatra's dream of restoring Ptolemaic glory, intertwined with Roman power through her children, seemed within reach, but it was a declaration of war on Octavian.
Chapter 6: Whispers and War Horns, The Gathering Storm. The Donations of Alexandria were a gift to Octavian's propaganda machine in Rome. He seized upon it, portraying Antony as a Roman traitor, emasculated and enslaved by a decadent Oriental sorceress. Antony's marriage to the virtuous Octavia, whom he had effectively abandoned, was contrasted with his scandalous cohabitation with Cleopatra. Octavian painted the conflict not as a Roman civil war, but as a patriotic defense of Roman virtue and tradition against Eastern despotism and effeminacy, orchestrated by the manipulative Egyptian queen who sought to rule Rome itself through her children, especially Caesarion. Octavian masterfully exploited Roman xenophobia and conservative values. He leaked Antony's will, or a document purported to be it, which supposedly confirmed the donations, and requested burial beside Cleopatra in Alexandria, a final, unforgivable insult to Roman sensibilities. The Senate, increasingly under Octavian's control, declared war, not on Antony, a Roman citizen, but specifically on Cleopatra. Antony, by supporting her, became an enemy of the state. Cleopatra and Antony understood the gravity. They mobilized their vast resources. Egypt's treasuries funded an enormous fleet and army. They gathered client kings and their forces from across the eastern Mediterranean. Their combined strength was formidable, arguably superior to Octavian's on paper. However, their alliance was complex. Many of Antony's Roman officers and soldiers were deeply uneasy about fighting fellow Romans under the banner of an Egyptian queen. Cleopatra's presence, while vital for resources and morale for some, was a liability for others. Strategic disagreements emerged. Cleopatra advocated a naval campaign, leveraging their powerful fleet to force a decisive encounter at sea, while some of Antony's generals favored a land war in Greece. Antony, torn between his Roman identity and his commitment to Cleopatra and their Eastern vision, ultimately sided with her naval strategy. They established their base at Patrae and later moved the main fleet into the sheltered Ambracian Gulf at Actium on the western coast of Greece, awaiting Octavian's advance.
Chapter 7: Sea of Fire, the battle that shook the world. The summer of 31 BC hung heavy over the Ambracian Gulf. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Agrippa, had blockaded Antony and Cleopatra's powerful armada inside the Gulf. Disease and desertion plagued Antony's camp. Supply lines were stretched. Agrippa systematically captured Antony's supporting bases around Greece, tightening the noose. Morale among Antony's Roman troops plummeted. Fighting for Cleopatra against fellow Romans felt like treason. Cleopatra, observing the deteriorating situation, pressed for a breakout. The stalemate favored Octavian. On September 2nd, 31 BC, Antony made his move. The massive fleet, perhaps 500 ships strong, rowed out of the Gulf into the open Ionian Sea to confront Agrippa's slightly smaller but more agile and better crewed fleet. Cleopatra commanded her own Egyptian squadron, positioned in the rear with the treasure ships. The battle began as a brutal, close-quarters melee. Antony's larger ships attempted to grapple and board Agrippa's vessels, but Agrippa's tactics, using superior maneuverability and incendiary missiles, inflicted heavy damage. The fighting raged for hours, inconclusive but bloody. Then came the pivotal moment. Cleopatra, seeing the center of the battle locked in a stalemate, and perhaps sensing impending disaster or acting on a prearranged plan, historians debate fiercely, ordered her squadron to raise their sails, the signal for a breakout, and suddenly surged through the center of the fray towards the open sea. Antony, seeing her move, abandoned his flagship, transferring to a faster vessel, and broke off the engagement to follow her. The sight of their commanders fleeing was catastrophic for the morale of Antony's fleet. Resistance crumbled, some ships surrendered, others were burned or captured. The Battle of Actium was lost. Cleopatra's motives remain shrouded in mystery. Was it premeditated escape? A desperate bid to save the Egyptian fleet and treasure for future resistance? A strategic withdrawal that Antony misread? Or panic? Regardless, the result was the same. The flight of Antony and Cleopatra handed Octavian a decisive, if not immediately total, victory. It shattered Antony's reputation as a leader and broke the back of his military power in the east. They sailed separately back to Egypt, the dream of their Eastern Empire dissolving in the smoke rising from the Sea of Actium.
Chapter 8: Twilight of the Gods, the Last Days in Alexandria. The return to Alexandria in the autumn of 31 BC was a somber procession. Defeat hung heavy in the air. Antony, once the vibrant Dionysus, retreated into isolation and despair in a small villa he built on a mole extending into the harbor, which he cynically named the Timonion after Timon of Athens, the misanthrope. Cleopatra, ever the pragmatist, prepared for the inevitable siege while simultaneously exploring avenues for survival. She knew Octavian was coming. She undertook desperate measures. She raised new levies, fortified Alexandria, and even began hauling her warships overland to the Red Sea, a monumental task ultimately abandoned. She sent envoys to Octavian, seeking terms, even offering to abdicate in favor of her children. She tested poisons on condemned prisoners, seeking a painless escape. She understood Octavian wanted her alive, a prize for his triumph in Rome. Her children were her bargaining chips, especially Caesarion, the living challenge to Octavian's inheritance. Antony, briefly roused from his stupor by a small, futile victory over Octavian's advance guard, relapsed into despair when his fleet and cavalry deserted en masse to the enemy.
Betrayed and broken, he received false news that Cleopatra had committed suicide. In his grief and shame, he fell upon his sword. The wound, however, was not immediately fatal. Learning Cleopatra was alive and barricaded in her mausoleum, a fortified tomb she had prepared, filled with treasure and combustibles, he begged to be brought to her. He was hauled up through a high window by her and her attendants. He died in her arms, the last great Roman republican, his ambitions extinguished. Cleopatra mourned him deeply. The crown of the earth doth melt, but her focus immediately shifted to her own fate and that of her children. Chapter 9. The Serpent's Choice, an End Forged in Stone. Octavian entered Alexandria in August 30 BC. Cleopatra, now his captive, was installed in her palace under guard, treated with outward respect but strict surveillance. Octavian visited her. She attempted to play her final cards. She pleaded for mercy, invoked Julius Caesar's memory, displayed her dignity and intellect, and tried to stir his pity. She knew he planned to parade her in chains through Rome. To be exhibited as a conquered barbarian queen, the embodiment of decadence overcome by Roman virtue, was an unbearable prospect. It would destroy her divine mystique, humiliate Egypt, and seal the fates of her children. Caesarion, sent south towards Ethiopia for safety, was captured and executed on Octavian's orders. Too many Caesars is not good. Cleopatra understood negotiation was futile. Octavian wanted Egypt, her treasures, and her symbolic defeat. He would not let her or her children by Antony live freely. Her only remaining power was the manner of her death. She requested permission to pour libations at Antony's tomb. The request was granted, but her guards remained vigilant. On August 12, 30 BC, a peasant delivered a basket of figs to the mausoleum where Cleopatra was confined. Hidden beneath the fruit was an asp, the Egyptian cobra, sacred symbol of the pharaohs, embodiment of the goddess Wadjet. Alternatively, she may have used a concealed poison pin. Having bathed and dressed in her full royal regalia, she arranged herself upon her golden couch. She applied the asp to her arm or perhaps her breast. The venom acted swiftly. When Roman guards burst in moments later, possibly alerted or simply checking, they found Cleopatra dead, her two faithful handmaidens, Eros and Charmion, dying beside her. Charmion was adjusting the diadem on her mistress's brow. One guard reportedly asked, "A fine deed this, Charmion?" "It is well done and fitting for a princess descended of so many royal kings," Charmion replied, and died.
Chapter 10. The Eternal Echo, Legacy in Dust and Dream. Cleopatra VII was dead at 39. Octavian, though denied his living trophy, secured her vast treasure and the fertile land of Egypt, which he annexed as a personal province, ending 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule and millennia of pharaonic independence. Her children by Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus were paraded in Octavian's triumph in Rome, shackled to a model of their mother's ship. They were spared execution but vanished into obscurity, raised by Octavia. Only Selene survived to adulthood, married to King Juba II of Mauritania. Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Egypt, the breadbasket of the empire, became his private fiefdom, ruled by a prefect. The Roman Republic was truly dead, buried beneath the ambitions Caesar, Antony, and Cleopatra had unleashed, and which Octavian had mastered. But Cleopatra's story did not end in the dust of Alexandria. Her life became a legend, reshaped by Roman propaganda, casting her as the wanton seductress, by later Christian moralists, and by fascinated historians and artists. Shakespeare immortalized her tragic grandeur. Elizabeth Taylor embodied her allure. She has been painted as a ruthless manipulator, a tragic romantic, a brilliant stateswoman, a femme fatale. The truth lies in the complex weave. She was all these things, and more.
She was the first Ptolemy in centuries to speak Egyptian, to embrace the religion and culture of her subjects, to present herself as Pharaoh Re, not just a Greek monarch. She used her formidable intellect, her linguistic skills, her political acumen, and yes, her sexuality as tools of statecraft in a desperate bid to preserve her kingdom's autonomy against the inexorable rise of Rome. She dared to challenge the Roman order, to envision a partnership of East and West, embodied in her children. She chose death over dishonor, controlling her final narrative as she had so often controlled her life. The river Nile flows on. The Library of Alexandria is dust. The palaces are buried. But the name Cleopatra endures. She is the last pharaoh, the queen who dared to love Caesars and challenge an empire, the woman who turned her death into an immortal act of defiance. Her story is not just one of ambition and tragedy, but of the enduring power of personality, the clash of civilizations, and the eternal human fascination with those who dare to grasp the very stars. She remains forever Cleopatra, the glory of her father, the beloved of her people, the serpent of the Nile whose bite shaped the course of history. The echo of her choices, her brilliance, and her fall resonates through the centuries, a testament to the indelible mark one extraordinary life can leave upon the world.